On a quiet summer night in 2012, 16-year-old Skylar Neese slipped out of her bedroom window, never to return home. What followed was a baffling disappearance that left her family and an entire community searching for answers. As the truth unraveled, it revealed a story so twisted, so unexpected, it would send shockwaves through everyone who heard it. This is the case of Skylar Neese, a heartbreaking reminder that the greatest betrayals often come from those we trust the most. It was July, an unassuming summer evening in Star City, West Virginia. Skylar Neese, a bright and driven year-old, had just finished her evening shift at Wendy's, the popular fast food chain known for its burgers and fries, where she worked part-time. She returned home to her parents, Dave and Mary Neese, who adored their only child. Skylar was everything they could have hoped for: intelligent, kind, and ambitious, with dreams of one day becoming a criminal defense attorney. Skylar had always been a social butterfly, forming strong friendships early in life. Among her closest friends were Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf. The trio had been inseparable for years. Sheila, with her outgoing and carefree personality, had been like a sister to Skylar since they were young. Rachel, on the other hand, was newer to the group, a red-haired, theater-loving girl who quickly became an integral part of their dynamic. Together, they were the epitome of teenage best friends, always laughing, taking selfies, and sharing secrets. But as the school year progressed, cracks began to form in their bond. Skylar started feeling excluded. She often confided in her other friends, and even tweeted about her frustrations, hinting that Sheila and Rachel were becoming closer to each other while leaving her out. Her tweets hinted at her frustrations, cryptically stating things like, "You doing stuff like this is why I will never completely trust you," and "all I do is hope." Despite the underlying issues, the trio continued their routine of late-night adventures. Sneaking out, driving around, and exploring quiet spots in their small town were their usual escapes. On the night of July 5th, everything seemed normal. After dinner, she retreated to her room, planning to rest after her shift. But just before midnight, she received a text. Sheila and Rachel had invited her out for a late-night drive. This wasn't unusual. The girls often snuck out together, seeking the thrill of teenage rebellion in their quiet town. Skylar, eager to join, climbed out of her bedroom window around 12:30 a.m., careful not to wake her parents. Security footage from the apartment complex showed her slipping into a car waiting just outside. Inside were Sheila and Rachel, laughing and chatting as though it were just another adventure. The next day, Skylar's parents realized she wasn't home. Her father, Dave Neese, assumed she had left early for work or gone to see friends. But as hours passed and Skylar didn't respond to calls or texts, worry set in. By the afternoon, they contacted Sheila, who claimed she and Rachel had picked Skylar up the night before but dropped her off near her house before midnight. Skylar's parents immediately filed a missing persons report. The police initially treated her disappearance as a runaway case. After all, teenagers often left home temporarily, only to return days later. But Skylar's parents knew this wasn't like her. She wasn't the type to run away without telling someone, especially when she had work and school to look forward to. Skylar's father said that she did not take her cell phone charger, that her window was left open, and that she planned on coming home. As the hours turned to days, the small town of Star City rallied behind the search for Skylar. Her friends, including Sheila and Rachel, appeared devastated, posting heartfelt messages on social media. Sheila tweeted, "Skylar, come back, I miss you so much." The community rallied, organizing searches and distributing flyers, and search parties combed through nearby woods and parks. But despite the outpouring of support, there were no leads. Skylar had vanished without a trace. Behind the scenes, however, cracks were beginning to form. Dave Neese couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sheila's demeanor, though outwardly heartbroken, felt rehearsed to him. He noted inconsistencies in her story. Rachel, too, began to withdraw, her bubbly exterior replaced with a quiet unease. Skylar's other friends also noticed their peculiar behavior. Sheila and Rachel seemed unusually close, almost as if they were hiding something. Gossip began to swirl around the small town. Skylar's cryptic tweets, the shifting dynamics between the three friends, and the lack of concrete evidence all painted an unsettling picture. For months, Skylar's parents clung to hope, holding on to the belief that their daughter would come home. But the truth, hidden beneath the facade of teenage friendship, was far darker than anyone could have imagined. It would take months of persistence and unraveling lies to uncover the sinister reality behind Skylar's disappearance, a truth that would shock their small town and shatter the idyllic image of teenage friendship forever. By late 2012, law enforcement had grown increasingly suspicious of Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf, Skylar's two best friends, though at first they appeared to be mourning, tears pouring onto social media posts, and seemingly heartbroken. Their behavior in interviews raised red flags. Investigators sensed that their stories weren't lining up, and the stress of their scrutiny began to build. The weight of the investigation began to strain Rachel. She was cracking under the pressure, her behavior becoming increasingly erratic. Her once calm and composed exterior was now marked by sudden emotional outbursts, leading those around her to wonder if she knew more than she was letting on. The first breakthrough came when Rachel Schoaf finally broke under pressure. As the investigation bore down on them, the two girls would glance nervously at each other during their conversations. Any mention of Skylar would make their voices waver. They would avoid direct eye contact, fidgeting, biting their nails, and speaking in hushed tones. As investigators leaned on them, trying to piece together Skylar's last moments, Sheila's composure started to falter. She began hesitating to answer questions, frequently changing her story, while Rachel became jittery and distracted, as though she were battling an invisible weight. On one particularly tense afternoon, Rachel broke down during a routine interview. Her voice trembled as she tried to respond to the investigators' inquiries about Skylar's habits, her friendships, and their last moments together. "We didn't know she'd just disappear like that. We didn't plan for this," she whispered, avoiding their gaze. Her body language, tense and defensive, suggested she was fighting something deeply buried, a secret she couldn't suppress for much longer. The investigators knew they had their suspicions, but they couldn't place their finger on it. Sheila and Rachel were close friends with Skylar, and both had been cooperating with law enforcement, until now. The inconsistencies in their stories were small at first: contradictory timelines, odd details about events Skylar had participated in prior to her disappearance. But the investigators had experience. They knew the signs of a person cracking under pressure. The turning point came when the two girls were placed under additional scrutiny. During a series of joint interviews with police, the two began acting visibly more anxious. Sheila, who had previously shown signs of arrogance and confidence in her ability to navigate through tense interviews, suddenly became withdrawn. She would only answer questions in short, sharp sentences, looking at the floor and then at her hands. Rachel, on the other hand, became visibly disturbed, wiping her face, pacing, and visibly shaken when questions about timelines or locations came up. As pressure escalated, the two friends' stories diverged. When investigators tried to get the same information from both of them, they found discrepancies. Sheila would say Skylar had a history of staying out late with friends, while Rachel would counter that Skylar was reliable and had rarely stayed away from home without telling her parents. These differences, seemingly minor on their own, began to paint a picture of a friendship that was beginning to unravel under scrutiny. Soon, it became clear that both girls were concealing something too deep and too heavy to ignore. The day Rachel finally broke came during a tense, drawn-out interview. The room was sterile, cold, and intimidating. The investigators had brought her into the station for questioning, once again to go over her timeline and recollections about Skylar's disappearance. Rachel had been in the hot seat for hours, with little water, little comfort, and the weight of pressure building on her shoulders. I can't keep lying," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her head bowed. Her words were broken, fragmented. "I didn't want this. I never meant for this to happen." The officers leaned in and encouraged Rachel to tell them everything. It was as though the words unlocked something inside her. Rachel took a deep breath, her voice quivering. "Sheila and we did it. We killed Skylar." The words were simple, but their weight was seismic. Rachel's body trembled as she spilled out the horrifying truth. She spoke of how the murder was premeditated, how the two girls had plotted to kill Skylar on that fateful night. The idea had come from a twisted mix of anger, frustration, and resentment. Rachel spoke through tears, her voice cracking with each word, explaining what really happened that night. Rachel later admitted that they killed Skylar because they didn't like her, and that they didn't want to be friends with her anymore. The confession came as a shock to the investigators, but they were finally getting answers. Rachel revealed the chilling details of that fateful night. According to their statements to the police, the night began with Skylar climbing out of her bedroom window around 12:30 a.m. Then the trio drove out of town, their car winding through desolate roads under the cover of darkness. Their destination was a remote area near the Pennsylvania border, a secluded spot they had visited before. The girls parked the car, stepping out into the still night. Skylar felt no reason to be alarmed, trusting her closest friends. But as the police learned, this outing had been in the making for weeks. It was not a spontaneous adventure, but a carefully planned act of betrayal. When the moment came, Sheila and Rachel carried out their horrifying plan. Armed with knives they had hidden in the car, the pair attacked Skylar. She fought back with all the strength she could muster, but the ambush was relentless. The attack left Skylar fatally wounded, her final words a heart-wrenching plea: "Why?" Once their horrifying act was done, the girls hastily moved Skylar's body to a wooded area nearby. They covered her remains with dirt and branches, believing they had concealed their crime. With that, they drove back home, discarding any evidence and resuming their lives as if nothing had happened. For months they carried on the facade, even pretending to mourn their friend. Rachel's voice quivered as she relived each detail, but ultimately she laid everything out, desperate for the burden to be lifted from her chest. With this newfound confession, attention shifted to Sheila. Though Rachel's admission was gut-wrenching, law enforcement still needed Sheila's side of the story. They brought her into questioning shortly after. Unlike Rachel, Sheila was colder, less emotional, and more guarded. Her initial reaction was denial, though her shaky voice gave her away. As investigators questioned her, they could see her fighting the confession, her words trying to stick to her alibi, but the evidence and Rachel's admission were undeniable. When pressed further, Sheila eventually admitted to her role in the murder. Her words came slowly, heavily, as though each syllable was being dragged out of her under pressure. Her confession came quickly, like a dam breaking under the weight of truth. The two girls recounted their actions, the betrayal, the plan, and the murder itself. As investigators pressed Rachel and Sheila for the whereabouts of Skylar's body, the two revealed the location, a wooded area near a ravine where they had buried her. The details provided in their confessions led authorities to launch an immediate search, determined to recover her remains and bring the truth to light. The search began on a foggy, damp morning. The woods were silent except for the sound of footsteps on wet leaves and the occasional snap of a branch. Guided by the confessions, the investigators combed through the uneven earth. The cold air was alive with tension as shovels dug into the soil. It didn't take long for investigators to find a patch of disturbed earth. As the shovels dug deeper, they uncovered undeniable evidence: Skylar Neese's remains. Skylar's body was cold, pale, and lifeless, lying in a shallow grave. The marks of a violent struggle were evident. Her clothing was torn, her hands bruised, and abrasions marred her skin, suggesting she had been dragged. The physical evidence matched Rachel and Sheila's confessions, confirming that Skylar had been stabbed, her body hastily buried, and the betrayal she faced in her final moments was tragically clear. The decomposition of Skylar's body added a layer of difficulty to the investigation. The passing months meant that the remains were not in pristine condition, but the evidence of her violent end remained undeniable. With care, the authorities removed Skylar's body and transported it to the medical examiner's office. The autopsy later confirmed the cause of death: multiple stab wounds, in line with what the girls had confessed. As the search concluded, the woods grew silent. The weight of discovery hung heavy over the scene. The confessions, the evidence, and the body left no doubt. Skylar Neese's murder had been premeditated, and the girls' confessions sealed their fate. Both Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy were arrested and charged soon after. Rachel Schoaf was the first to face the courts. Unlike Sheila, Rachel opted for a plea deal rather than a full trial. Her lawyer stated that her willingness to cooperate and her early confession were key to her decision to take responsibility for her actions. In January 2013, she formally entered her guilty plea to second-degree murder charges. Her attorneys claimed that she was overwhelmed by pressure and regret, and that her actions were the result of a complex and poor decision-making process. The prosecutors argued that her confessions were evidence of her full participation in the crime, and that she was just as responsible for the murder as Shelia. The plea agreement spared Rachel from being tried in a long, drawn-out court process, and ensured that her case was resolved in a timely manner. Shelia Eddy, by contrast, did not plead guilty. Her defense team took a combative approach to the trial, emphasizing that their client was struggling with personal challenges and was under intense pressure at the time of the crime. However, the evidence against her was damning. The confessions, physical evidence from the crime scene, and statements made during investigation interviews all pointed to her involvement. The trial for Shelia took place in 2014 and spanned several weeks. The state presented strong evidence against Shelia. The prosecutors used her confession as a critical piece of evidence, highlighting the following. First, Shelia's acknowledgement during interrogation of stabbing Skylar Neese. Second, her admission to participating in the planning and execution of the murder. And third, the physical evidence of Skylar's body being buried in the wooded area, with DNA evidence corroborating Shelia's involvement. Witness testimonies, combined with the confessions, painted a grim picture. The prosecution argued that Shelia had actively planned and participated in luring Skylar into the trap that led to her death. Shelia's defense attorneys tried to paint her as a troubled teen influenced by circumstances and poor decisions. They focused on attempting to prove that her youth, mental health challenges, and other external pressures played a role in her actions. Despite their best efforts, the court was not swayed by the defense's strategy. Evidence was strong, the confessions were clear, and the motives behind the murder had been well established. After a series of emotional testimonies, witness statements, and legal arguments, the court reached its decision. Shelia Eddy. Found guilty of first-degree murder, she was sentenced to life in prison with the eligibility for parole after 15 years. And Rachel Schoaf was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with the eligibility for parole after 10 years. Her willingness to confess and cooperate with the investigation was considered a mitigating factor by the judge. Both sentences came as a relief to Skylar Neese's family, who had been forced to endure months of anguish as they searched for answers. Skylar's parents, Dave and Mary Neese, were present in the courtroom during both trials. The grief etched on their faces was evident as they heard the details of their daughter's murder and watched the two defendants take their sentences. They later spoke publicly, emphasizing the importance of accountability and the need for answers for all grieving families affected by violence. Skylar's father, Dave Neese, addressed the court, saying he was speaking on behalf of his daughter because she can't be here. He told the court that since the day of his daughter's disappearance, my life and my wife's life have been drastically altered. We're no longer a family. You can look into the eyes of those who were responsible, but you can never know what they heard as they were taking her life. You can see the faces of the killer, but you can't see Skylar's face. You can't imagine how Mary and I now feel. The person sitting before you, Skylar's so-called friend, took her away from us without any remorse or feeling. Skylar Neese's mother, Mary Neese, often reflected on the close bond her daughter shared with Shelia. Shelia and Skylar Neese had known each other since they were kids. She said, they were inseparable. Every weekend, either Skylar was at her house or she was at our house. In the days following Skylar's disappearance, Shelia appeared deeply committed to finding her. Mary recalled how Shelia joined the search efforts, going door to door in the neighborhood. Shelia would knock on doors and say, "Have you seen this girl?" At the time, Shelia's actions seemed like those of a devoted friend, but later they would take on a chilling significance. Skylar's father said, "The whole time, we're comforting Shelia as we would a sibling, telling her it's going to be okay, don't worry about it, we're going to get her home, and the whole time she's going, God, I hope so. I miss her so much." There are special places in hell for people like the both of them, and they're going to get exactly what they deserve, a long time in prison to think about what they've done, remarked Skylar's father. After Skylar's tragic death, her parents, Mary and Dave Neese, channeled their grief into action by advocating for legislative change to help prevent similar tragedies. Their efforts resulted in the creation of Skylar's Law, which amended the West Virginia Amber Alert system. An Amber Alert is an emergency notification system used to quickly spread information about a missing child who is believed to have been abducted. It notifies the public through broadcasts, text messages, and social media, urging them to help locate the child based on provided descriptions. The goal is to enlist the public's help in finding the child as soon as possible to ensure their safety. Before Skylar's law was enacted, Amber Alerts could only be issued if authorities believed a child had been abducted. This limitation often caused delays in issuing alerts for missing children who didn't fit that specific criteria. Skylar's law ensures that an Amber Alert can now be activated for any missing child deemed to be in imminent danger, regardless of whether there is evidence of an abduction. During her advocacy, Mary Neese shared, "This law won't bring our daughter back, but if it can save another child's life, then her death wasn't completely in vain," she stated, highlighting her determination to give Skylar's story a meaningful legacy. Dave Neese also emphasized the importance of the law in honoring Skylar's memory. "If Skylar's story can help save just one more child, then that's what we want her legacy to be," he stated. Skylar's law was officially signed into legislation in 2013. The law has since served as a crucial tool for law enforcement, ensuring faster responses when children go missing. Sheila Eddy's Twitter account became a chilling part of the case following Skylar Neese's murder. In the days after the crime, Sheila posted several tweets that seemed to reflect her detached emotional state. On July 8, 2012, just one day after the murder, Sheila tweeted, "We really did go on 3. This cryptic message referred to the plan Rachel and Sheila had formulated beforehand, where they intended to count to 3 before attacking Skylar with knives. At the time, the tweet seemed like a vague remark, but after the case was solved, it became a disturbing clue that Sheila had left behind. The tweet became a horrifying reminder of how calculated the murder had been. The following day, she tweeted, "They say you remember the past better than it really was." This seemingly reflective statement took on a more sinister meaning once investigators uncovered the full details of Skylar's death. Some believe this was Sheila's way of distancing herself from the gruesome reality of the murder, attempting to reframe it in a way that made it easier for her to cope with. In addition to these 2 tweets, Sheila posted several others that, in hindsight, seemed disconnected from the gravity of the crime. Many of her posts were casual and nonchalant, betraying no indication of remorse or guilt. At the time, they were overlooked, but once the truth came to light, these tweets, scattered over the days following Skylar's murder, left a haunting impression. The chilling nature of Sheila's posts on social media highlighted her emotional detachment from the brutal act she had committed, offering a disturbing glimpse into the mindset of someone who could perpetrate such a heinous crime. The psychology behind Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf's actions has fascinated and horrified many. Both were young, seemingly ordinary high school students, making their calculated actions even more shocking. Psychologists suggest that their motivations stemmed from a blend of immaturity, impulsivity, and a toxic friendship dynamic. Reports indicate that Sheila exhibited manipulative and controlling tendencies, often influencing Rachel and others in their circle. Rachel, on the other hand, appeared to be more impressionable, succumbing to peer pressure and Sheila's dominance in their friendship. Together, they created an unhealthy dynamic where boundaries and morality seemed to blur. What's particularly unsettling is the lack of genuine remorse shown by Sheila. Her behavior after the crime, posting tweets and engaging in the search for Skylar, suggests a troubling level of detachment and sociopathy. Rachel, in contrast, displayed intense guilt, which likely led to her eventual confession. This dichotomy in their personalities highlights how different psychological factors influence their participation in the crime. Experts also note that the murder may have stemmed from their desire to eliminate someone who didn't fit into their increasingly exclusive friendship. It speaks to a chilling level of premeditation, fueled by selfishness and a complete disregard for the value of human life. When it comes to recognizing warning signs of dangerous friendships or toxic behavior, it's important to look for the following. 1. Isolation. One of the first signs is when a friend begins to isolate you from other friends or family members. This can make you more dependent on them and less likely to recognize unhealthy behavior. 2. Manipulation. A toxic friend might manipulate situations to their advantage, making you feel guilty for setting boundaries or prioritizing your own needs. 3. Constant drama. If a friendship consistently brings you stress, drama, or anxiety, it's a red flag. Healthy relationships should be supportive, not constantly tumultuous. 4. Controlling behavior. If a friend tries to control your actions, decisions, or who you associate with, it's a serious warning sign of toxicity. 5. Lack of empathy. If someone shows little regard for your feelings or tries to belittle you, it can be a sign of emotional manipulation or an abusive dynamic. 6. Jealousy and envy. A friend who is constantly jealous or envious of your accomplishments, relationships, or happiness can be a sign of a deeper, more dangerous issue. Recognizing these red flags early and taking steps to distance yourself can prevent harmful situations and help protect your well-being. This case serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of toxic friendships, hidden resentments, and the unchecked emotional turmoil that can unfold during adolescence. Skylar Neese's life was tragically taken by those she trusted most, leaving behind a grieving family and a community forever altered. And that brings us to the end of today's case. If you have any information or thoughtful insights about this case, please let us know respectfully in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on future cases. And until next time, when we explore another bone-chilling case, right here on Slice of Darkness. Stay vigilant, stay safe.